Today's spoiler video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use the link below to pre-order your cards today.
Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first daily dose of Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers. It is finally time to talk sweet new Magic cards from one of Magic's most iconic planes. We just got a preview stream today from Wizards showing off a ton of awesome stuff, which means we got a lot of cards to talk about. We should probably jump right into it, but before we do, two quick reminders. One, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout spoiler season, you'll find them all over at MTGPreviews.com. And number two, Wizards also spoiled a bunch of Commander stuff today that isn't in the Innistrad Midnight Hunt set proper, but is in Commander decks and set boosters and all this stuff. Rather than dumping it into this already pretty long video, I decided to do a separate video, put it up on the Commander YouTube. So in a couple hours, you'll be able to find a Commander spoiler video over at the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube. So anyway, with that stuff out of the way, let's talk sweet new Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards. First up today, we got a new Planeswalker, actually the return of an old Planeswalker, showing off a new take on an old mechanic, Arlinn the Pack's Hope, and also Arlinn the Moon's Fury. So as you can see, another double-sided card, although this is not an MDFC. This is more similar to the old Werewolf transform mechanic, but actually it's a brand new mechanic altogether, Daybound and Nightbound. So before we talk about what Arlinn does, we got to talk a little bit about this mechanic so no one's confused. So first off, even though Arlinn has two sides, it's not an MDFC. You can't just choose which side to play from your hand. What Arlinn comes into play is going to depend on whether it's day or night. As you can see on Arlinn's front side, Arlinn Pack's Hope, it says Daybound, if a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. And then the backside says Nightbound, if a player casts at least two spells during their own turn, it becomes day the next turn. So essentially how this is going to work is once any player plays anything with a Daybound or Nightbound mechanic, Arlinn, or I'm sure there's other stuff with this mechanic, we're going to start tracking for the rest of the game day and night. There's actually tokens that we can do this with. And as you can see, these tokens, well, not the tokens themselves, but whether it's day or night has a pretty big impact on the game. So you play your Arlinn, it's going to become daytime. The next time someone on their own turn doesn't cast a spell, it's going to become nighttime. That is going to transform any day/night creatures or permanents, whatever, into their night side half. So Arlinn is going to flip over to her back half. However, it actually is another twist compared to the old Werewolf mechanic, which is whether it's day or night determines what side your Daybound, Nightbound thing is going to come into play on. So if it happens to be nighttime based on other cards doing things and you have an Arlinn in your hand, it's not going to come into play with its front half, it's going to come into play on its Nightbound half. So that's going to go on for the rest of the game no matter what. Like even if all the werewolves, all the Daybound and Nightbound creatures go away, we're still going to keep tracking this for the rest of the game once anyone plays a creature with this mechanic. And this is a twist on the old Werewolf mechanic. In some ways it's very similar. If you look at like Huntmaster of the Fells, the old Werewolf mechanic is at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast during the last turn, you would transform it, and then the backside was if two or more spells were cast during the last turn, transform it. The big twist here is it only counts the person whose turn it is. One of the downsides of like the old werewolves, like Huntmaster of the Fells, is let's say you play a Huntmaster, the next turn you skip your turn because you want to flip your Huntmaster. Your opponent could wait till your end step and cast an instant, cast an op, cast a lightning bolt, and you would essentially skip your turn and your werewolf would end up flipping. The new Daybound and Nightbound mechanic gets around that. It only counts you casting stuff during your old turn. So I feel like it's a mostly strict upgrade with some interesting twists, very similar to the old Werewolf mechanic, but also very different and somewhat more powerful. So as far as Arlinn herself, either side enters with 4 loyalty. As I mentioned, what side you get to start with is going to depend on whether it's day or night when you cast it. If no one has cast any Daybound or Nightbound things, it's going to come into play on the front side, the Daybound side. But if other Daybound or Nightbound things have been being played, it could come in on the front or back. So the front side is +1 until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So essentially a way to cast your stuff at instant speed, which works really well with werewolves werewolves, it makes it much easier to skip your turn, because you can skip your turn and still play creatures with the +1/+1. And then -3, you get 2 wolf tokens. And then the backside, +2, add a green and a red mana. 0, it becomes a 5/5 werewolf with trample, indestructible, and haste. That is a very scary threat. So the front side of Arlinn, it's very similar to like Vivien Champion of the Wilds, with the ability to cast your creatures with flash, although in some ways it's even better because Arlinn cares about werewolves. It's a wolf card, it has a daybound nightbound mechanic, and you get extra value in a daybound nightbound deck, being able to cast your stuff at instant speed, because as I said, it's a way you can flip from day to night but still be casting stuff. You don't have to skip your entire turn like you would with old werewolves. And then -3, it's like a wolf version of Mona the Unhallowed, which isn't a super good card, but it's also not a super bad card. Like 4 mana, put 2 bodies on tribe theoretically on the battlefield. Pretty reasonable effect. You're not playing it for that, but there's going to be times where you just need some chump blockers to stay alive, and making a couple of 2/2s will get the job done. The backside is kind of insane. The +2, I don't know the best comparison. It basically gives Arlinn a discount if you're playing it on that half. You can play it for sort of 2 mana, because you can +2 to get that mana back, but you do have to get up to 4 mana initially. The more scary part is the 5/5 indestructible trample haste mode. That's a reality smasher, potentially for 4 mana. That is a scary clock with a lot of damage. I think that is the most exciting mode of Arlinn. It's just this massive hasty catch you by surprise if it's nighttime, gonna come in and, I don't know, jump at your throat and eat you and really get you type of clock. So I think the backside of Arlinn is pretty impressive. It's a difficult card to evaluate just because daybound and nightbound is different. I think we've seen the old werewolf mechanic be kind of meh, like it's kind of hard to control, traditionally not a super constructed playable mechanic, although some of the best werewolf cards like Huntmaster of the Fells have seen play, but it's not really typically a constructed mechanic. I do think some of these changes though are going to make it a lot more playable, and Arlinn, probably the best Arlinn that we've ever seen. I think it's going to be at its best in some sort of dedicated daybound nightbound werewolf style deck where you can use the +1 on the front half to still cast your stuff and manipulate whether it's day or night to your advantage, but it could be a good enough card, especially with that backside reality smasher 5/5 trample ace indestructible, to play in like Bard class Gruul, maybe even just some Gruul mid-range style deck. Like, it is a pretty reasonable value card, even if you're not really fully built around flipping from day to night and doing werewolf shenanigans. I also think this is probably an auto include in any werewolf commander deck, mostly because of the +1 on the front half, where being able to cast your stuff with flash is just really, really powerful. There's some other ways to do it, but not a ton in red and green. That's more of like a blue thing in Commander. So having another way to cast your stuff with flash seems pretty valuable. And then it makes some mana, it makes some wolves. I think it's good enough and on flavor enough that if you're playing Ulrich or whatever sweet werewolf commander we get in Innistrad Midnight Hunt, you're probably going to want Arlinn in your deck. So Arlinn, I like this card. It shows off a sweet new mechanic. I think this is an interesting planeswalker. The back half 5/5 indestructible trample ace really scares me. I think that's a legitimate threat. And it's just a cool card. So I don't think it's busted or anything, but I do think that Arlinn is good enough to see play, especially if we get more good daybound, nightbound, werewolf style creatures. So a little bit wait and see mode. I think if there's a good werewolf deck, Arlinn's going to be a big part of it. If we get enough werewolves to make a good deck, I would guess so, considering that's the theme of our set. But we'll have to wait and see as we get more creatures with the daybound, nightbound mechanic and more wolves and werewolves. Speaking of transform cards, we got another one, although this is not daybound and nightbound. This is just a transforming angel, enduring angel, a new 5 mana white mythic angel. So the front side of this card, flying and double strike, and you have hexproof. You get a 3/3, and then it says if your life total would be reduced to 0 or less, instead transform enduring angel and your life total becomes 3. Then if enduring angel didn't transform this way, you lose the game. I know that last line of text is a little weird. We'll talk about why that might be on there in a minute. And then let's say you play your enduring angel, your life total goes to 0 or less, it transforms. What do you get? You get a star with its power and toughness equal to your life total. So it's going to start off as a 3/3, but whenever it attacks, you double your life total. So you attack, it becomes a 6/6. If you survive again and your life total is the same, you attack, it becomes a 12/12, or maybe you have life gain shenanigans. It still has flying and you still have hexproof, no double strike on this side. So essentially, it's a 5 mana flyer that attacks for 6, gives you hexproof, and protects you once from losing the game if it's on the battlefield and you're dying to damage. So Enduring Angel, it reminds me of a cross between Angel of Grace, sort of. Like Angel of Grace was another 5-mana angel that could save you from dying once. It was like a one-shot worship, kind of like an Angel's Grace, essentially, which its name suggests, but you would cast it and you'd go to 1 instead of dying to damage. Enduring Angel has to be sitting out on the battlefield first. You're not flashing it in response to dying, but if it's sitting on the battlefield, it does the same thing. It keeps you alive for a turn and leaves a big flyer on the battlefield. Combined with a Spirit of the Hearth, I don't think that a 5-drop that gives you hexproof is super important. We've seen cards like this, like Leyline of the Sanctity can be really strong, but that's mostly because it's coming down early against Thoughtseize and stuff like that. It's still some upside. Your opponent can't just lightning bolt your face after you go to 3 and flip your Enduring Angel, so it is a bonus, but I don't think it's the reason you play the card. And then, once you actually flip around to the backside, the creature is kind of insane. You get a Sarah's Avatar, a creature with power and toughness equal to your life total. That's a 7-mana card, combined with essentially a Celestial Mantle, doubling your life total when you attack. The only drawback is, if you're getting the backside of Angelic Enforcer, your life total is going to be 3 to start with. Sarah's Avatar and also Celestial Mantle are at their best when you have a lot of life. You're not really going to have that option right away with Angelic Enforcer, because the only way it flips is you dying and then your life's going to 3. So it's going to start off very small, although if you survive a few turns with this on the battlefield, it's quickly going to regrow your life total. You're going to have a massive creature. Your life's going to get up to, 60, 80, some ridiculous amount, and basically just put the game away. So if this actually sticks on the battlefield and you don't immediately die the next turn, it probably is going to get you back in the game and maybe even win you the game. One thing I really like about it is this works with any time your life total is reduced to 0 or less. We've seen some of these protection spells in the past, like Worship, one of my favorites, that technically only works with damage. If damage would reduce your life total to 1 or less, it protects you. Enduring Angel doesn't care how your life total gets to 0 or less, which is relevant in Standard with stuff like Dina, Witherbloom, which aren't technically dealing damage. They're causing you to lose life, which I know is like very close to the same thing, but technically a little bit different, technically not damage. So Enduring Angel going to protect you against drain effects, life loss effects as well. As far as that weird last line attack, then if it didn't transform, you lose the game. Why is that on there? And I believe the answer is it's to account for some weird fringe situations where you have a copy of Enduring Angel. Let's say you use Lithiform Angel to make a token copy, or maybe you clone Enduring Angel. The way the rules work with these copying effects is these copies are only going to be whatever side you copied, essentially. So you cast Enduring Angel, Lithiform Engine it, your card is only going to have the front side. The back half in that scenario doesn't actually exist, or you play an Enduring Angel and clone it, the clone copy is not going to have the back half, so it can't actually transform. There would be this weird scenario where you like have a cloned Enduring Angel and your opponent kills you, and then you go back to 3, and then your opponent kills you, and you go back to 3, and can just kind of never lose the game because it can never transform and it keeps trying to, but it can't do it. So having that weird line of text on there basically makes sure that that's not an issue. There's no weird fringe scenario when Enduring Angel with a clone or a Lithiform Engine becomes this weird 2-card combo that makes it so you can never die. As far as how good Enduring Angel is, there's good news and bad news. The good news is Angels are a legit deck, especially in Standard 2022. It's even arguably a top tier deck. So there is a pre-built home for this, along with Youthful Valkyrie and Righteous Valkyrie and Star Knight Unleash. It is an Angel. You can just throw this right into your Angel deck. Is it good enough for the Angel deck? That's where the question comes in. The biggest drawback of Enduring Angel is it's a 5-mana 3/3. If it had 1 more toughness, I'd be a lot more hyped about it, because some of the best removal spells heading into post-rotation Standard are stuff like Frostbite, Dragon's Fire, that just happen to deal 3 damage. I feel like the downside of Enduring Angel is you're going to play it and it's going to die for 1 mana to Frostbite, and then your opponent kills you and it's not protecting you. So there is some problems there with how it matches up to removal. Honestly, if instead of a 5-mana 3/3 flying double strike, which essentially makes it a 6-power attacker, if this was something like a 5-mana 5/5 like Baneslayer Angel, or even a 5-mana 5/4, 4/4, like Angel of Grace, I would be a lot more excited about it, because I'm a little concerned that it's just going to trade down with 1 or 2 mana removal that happens to line up really well with Enduring Angel. So I'm not saying that's a deal breaker or it makes it completely unplayable, but I think that is a concern. This isn't Dies to Doomblade. This is my 5 mana thing has so little toughness, it dies to the shock that everyone plays in red in this format. So Enduring Angel, it's a cool card. I like it. I think it's a really sweet way to maybe protect yourself. We do have Angel Tribal decks. I love it, but I'm a little scared that it's not going to be good enough to see competitive play in Standard just because of how it lines up with the removal. So a cool card, awesome to see transform back, might be a little too fragile even though it's got a lot of text on it. Next up, we finally got a real werewolf commander, and not just a real one, this is kind of an insane card. Tovolar, Dire Overlord / Tovolar, the Midnight Scourge. So Tovolar, the front half, 3 mana 3/3. When a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card, so Werewolf Toski essentially, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves or werewolves, it becomes night and then transform any number of human werewolves you control. So you're going to flip not only your new werewolves that are already going to transform because of day and night, but flip the old ones as well. The back half, same static ability. When a wolf or werewolf deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and then pay X red and green to give a wolf or werewolf plus X plus 0 in trample until end of turn. So essentially Kessig Wolf Run. This card is absolutely absurd, and it is finally the completion of the Werewolf Commander saga. If you remember, when we got original Innistrad, Werewolves came out. Commander wasn't that big back in 2011 when Innistrad came out, but there was not a legend to play a Werewolf Commander deck. Everyone complained about it, and Wizards even admitted it, and they said, don't worry, we're going to Shadows over Innistrad. We're finally fixing the problem and not giving this commander. We're going to do it. And then they released Ulrich of the Crawling Horde, and the response was not great. People kind of hated Ulrich, and rightly so. It's not a very good card, not a very exciting card. So even though Wizards printed the Werewolf Commander, players still weren't happy. I think that Tovolar is finally the Werewolf Commander that people want. Wizards went all out with this one. They put a bunch of text on this card that there's really no way this card cannot be a really, really powerful commander. We've seen Toski, Bearer of Secrets, be absurd. This ability to draw a card whenever you deal combat damage to someone is absolutely one of the best things you can be doing in a creature-based deck in Commander. Tovolar does that, only for wolves or werewolves, but that's fine. This is an absurd tribal commander. If you stuff your deck full of wolves and werewolves, this is going to draw you a ridiculous number of cards, which is what you want, because wolves and werewolves, while they're improving as we get more Innistrad sets and get more wolves and werewolves, there's not a ton of them, and you're going to need a lot of them because you're going to be playing some random commons that are just not really super powerful by Commander standards. But if every one of them is drawing you a card when they deal combat damage, oh my goodness, is that actually insane. The other thing I love about this card is how it gives you some control over flipping your stuff. The other big problem with werewolves in Commander that makes them so difficult to play successfully is it's really hard to control their flipping. They're flipping back and forth. You got a bunch of opponents. It's really easy for players to cast spells and keep them from flipping. Well, Tovolar, not only is it going to flip all your new stuff that has Daybound and Nightbound, it's going to flip all your old stuff as well. You get to transform any number of human werewolves, so your Daybreak Ranger, and Instigator Gang, and Sage of Ancient Lore, those are all going to flip along with all your new stuff as well. This is very close to like the ideal werewolf commander. It took Wizards a few returns to Innistrad to finally get it right, but with Tovolar, they finally nailed the werewolf commander. And then the back half of the card, kind of insane. You still get the Toski, and you get a Kessig Wolf Run, make a bunch of mana, and just smash your opponent to death with trampling werewolves. The card is absolutely great. I even think this card has a chance in Standard. It would surprise me if Wizards is going to make a werewolf set and not make the werewolves good enough to be Standard playable. Although, I will say, when Throne of Eldraine came out, I thought that Circle of Loyalty was going to be good, based mostly on that same theory that Wizards wasn't going to make a set based around Knights and then not make Knights playable. And it ended up that Knights just really weren't playable and Circle of Loyalty really wasn't playable. So it could happen again, but we can already start to see the curve of werewolves. We got Werewolf Pack Leader. Ranger class makes a wolf token. Those are both really good cards that already see play in Standard just as standalone green aggro threats. We got Arlinn, and I'm sure we're going to get a ton of other powerful stuff in Innistrad. So while I think Tovolar's main purpose is to fix the we don't have a real werewolf commander problem, I think this could actually be a good Standard card as well in some sort of day-night werewolf Arlinn flipping your stuff back around aggro style deck. So Tovolar, the card is just great. It is great in every way possible. It's the perfect commander. It's probably got Standard potential. If you're building werewolves in Commander, this should be your commander every single time. The card is absolutely bonkers. We also got Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia. So Jadar, 2-mana 1/1, legendary human wizard. At the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with decay, a new mechanic that we'll talk more about in a minute, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with decay. So decay basically means that the creature can't block, and when it attacks, you gotta sacrifice it at the end of combat. So it's a token, but it's kind of a temporary token, so to speak. Wizard had mentioned they figured out a way to add a drawback to tokens so they can make them cheaper. That is decay, and it's a theme with zombies in the set. Jadar, though, I think this is actually a really sweet card. Also, we can see one of the showcase styles. There's 2 showcase styles in the set. Looks pretty horrific and spectacular. So Jadar, I actually think this is a good card. The easiest comparison, probably a Fidiomancer. A Fidiomancer just makes a snake if you don't have a snake on your upkeep. The biggest downside of Jadar is definitely that the token can't block. One of the powers of Fidiomancer is it plays defense for days. You make this Death Touch snake, no one wants to attack you. If they do, you block with the snake, then on the upkeep, you get another one and do it again and do it again. And it's a really good defensive card. Jadar doesn't have the defensive capabilities. However, it's a 2-drop that comes along with a 2/2 on your end step. So unless your opponent has instant speed removal, you're getting at least one of these tokens right away. And then if that token happens to die or you can kill it, then you're going to get another one to replace it, which is actually very, very powerful. So as far as standard play, zombies is one potential home. We're still waiting to see how many zombies we get from the set. We know Champion of the Parish is coming. There's not a ton of good zombies that are going to be remaining in standard through rotation, but I'm sure we're getting more in Innistrad. Little awkward that Jadar itself is not a zombie. It's always awkward if you play a full-on tribal deck and you have a card that makes a member of your tribe but isn't a member of that tribe, because Jadar itself wouldn't benefit from a lord, or it won't trigger a Champion of the Parish, although the zombies that it can make will, of course. So that's one possibility. Maybe zombies are good. Another possibility is maybe Jadar is just good enough for a mono black aggro deck. We've seen mono black aggro be a thing in standard 2022. There is a lot of competition in the 2-drop slot. We got white, which happens to be a zombie card, Bloodsky Berserker, Skycloud Shade, but Jadar's ability to immediately, well, at your end step, but the first turn it comes into play, put 3 power on the battlefield and 3 toughness, that's pretty exciting in an aggro deck. Like, if you look at all these other 2-drops that are seeing play, Jadar offers the most immediate value the turn it comes into play. A 1/1 and a 2/2, that's better than any of these other cards, and I think that puts it in the conversation for seeing play in these decks. However, there is one place where Jadar is almost guaranteed to shine, and the place I'm most excited about it, and that is in sacrifice decks. The zombie not being able to block might make it a little bit hard to get rid of. I guess you can jump attack or whatever, but what Jadar can do that is incredibly powerful is give you a sacrificable body for free every single turn. So you play Jadar, then you sacrifice the zombie to Village Rites and draw 2 cards, then guess what? You get another zombie, so then you can sacrifice it to Deadly Dispute, or you can sacrifice it to Plumb the Forbidden. Any other sacrifice type synergies are going to be insanely powerful with Jadar. So I think this could be a great 2-drop in sacrifice decks where it turns those zombies into insane amounts of card advantage. There's things that let you sacrifice a creature to have removal. So there's tons of synergies, and I think that's where Jadar is at its best. So there's a bunch of possibilities for Jadar, but to me, this is most likely going to shine in a sacrifice deck where you can keep sacking that zombie, keep getting it back, and using that for value. And I think the same is mostly true in Commander. If you go back to the Phiomancer example, that mostly sees playing in sacrifice decks. So Yawgmoth, Tisa, Urza of Scion, Rankle, Master of Planks, decks where your commander can sacrifice things for value. Jadar seems like an easy inclusion there because of that zombie that you sack to Yawgmoth to draw a card, or sack to Tisa for removal, or sack to Rankle, get its combat damage trigger. So Jadar, it's a sweet card. It's a powerful card. We'll have to see how Decay plays. Not being able to block with the token is a big drawback. Going away at the end of combat, I guess, is a bit of a drawback as well. I mean, it's certainly a drawback. How big of one? I don't know. Like, how often is your 2/2 going to be able to attack anyway? So we'll have to see how that aspect plays out. But if you can use this as a synergy piece with sacrifice stuff, Jadar has potential to be very strong. We also got a new red burn spell, Light Up the Night. So Light Up the Night, red and X, sorcery. It deals X damage to any target, or it deals X+1 damage if the target is a creature or a planeswalker. And then the most interesting part of the card, is flashback for 4 mana and remove X loyalty counters from among planeswalkers you control. If you cast a spell that way, X can't be 0. So essentially, with the flashback, if you can get 10 loyalty, 15 loyalty worth of planeswalkers on the battlefield, this for 4 mana can be dealing an absurd amount of damage. So Light Up the Night. On one hand, we've seen a million cards like this before. It's kind of a long time trope in Magic. Blaze, Crater's Claw, Red Sun Zenith, Devil's Play. Many sets have their version of the Red and X burn spell, and this is Innistrad Midnight Hunt's version, except there's reasons why this is one of the better ones of the cycle. First is the fact that it's X+1 damage to a creature or planeswalker. So if you're going to face, it's a Blaze, discounting the flashback. However, if you're killing a creature or planeswalker, it scales a little bit better. That said, even with the +1, it's still not super efficient. I mean, for 1 mana, you're dealing 1 damage, like a Lava Dart. For 2 mana, you're dealing 2 damage, so a Bad Shock. For 3 mana, you're dealing 3 damage, so like a Open Fire, but it's sorcery speed. So even with the +1, it's still not very efficient. However, I really like the flashback part. That's the most exciting part. And the thing I immediately thought of when I saw this card is, I think we already got a home for this in Historic. In Historic, and in Pioneer to some extent, and even to Modern a little bit, we've seen some mono-red Planeswalker decks that are like Planeswalker ramp decks, where the goal of the deck is just ramp and stick Karns, in Ugins, in Chandras. Light Up the Night seems absolutely ideal for these decks. Yeah, it's kind of a bad removal spell when you're casting it the first time, but then in the late game, when you got these big planeswalkers on the battlefield, it seems pretty easy to, for 4 mana, remove like 10 plus loyalty from planeswalkers and just one-shot kill your opponent with Light Up the Night. So I think that there's definitely potential there. Maybe the same thing could work in Standard. Maybe we can have like Rakdos planeswalkers with Professor Onyx, Intibble, already good Standard cards, and then have Light Up the Night be your slightly inefficient removal spell that also turns into your finisher with flashback. So if you're playing a Super Friend style deck and you're gonna have a bunch of loyalty, high loyalty planeswalkers on the battlefield, then Light Up the Night goes even higher up in value. So Light Up the Night, it's an interesting card. On one hand, we've seen it a million times before. It's a Blaze with a twist. On the other hand, the flashback and the loyalty ability is really interesting and opens up some possibilities that none of the other similar cards have. We also got a new Izzet copying spell, Galvanic Iteration. So 2 mana, a blue and a red for an instant. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it. You can choose new targets for the copy, and then flashback of 3. This is actually a really good copying spell. We've seen Teach by Example, Dual Strike, see a bit of fringe play and some kind of janky fun decks in Standard. They also see a reasonable amount of Commander play, and Galvanic Iteration is essentially just an upgrade on those because of the flashback. If you get to choose between Teach by Example or Dual Strike and Galvanic Iteration, I think you're choosing Galvanic Iteration like 100% of the time. Another comparison is Increasing Vengeance, also 2 mana to copy a spell, and then if you flash it back for 5 mana, you get to copy it twice. Galvanic Iteration, of course, you only get 1 copy, but still, being able to copy something twice for a total of 5 mana, that is pretty efficient. Plus, being able to flash it back offers some decent upside that we'll talk about as we go along. In Standard, we've played these copy spells in a couple of different places. We played recently a Tasha's Hideous Laughter deck, where the goal was to copy Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and we were using some of the worst copy spells. We were using Teach by Example and some of the less powerful ones. Galvanic Iteration, huge upgrade there for multiple reasons. It's just a better card overall, and the ability to like get up to 8 mana, Galvanic Iteration, flashback Galvanic Iteration, then Tasha's Hideous Laughter to essentially just win the game. That is a huge upside. We also played a Treasure Storm deck. We're trying to use copy spells to copy Unexpected Windfall, Seize the Spoils. Galvanic Iteration seems like an insane addition there as well, using it once and then using it again from the graveyard. So I really like this card. Also works really well with the Magecraft mechanic from Strixhaven, where Magecraft cares about spells being cast or copied. So let's say you get down your Sedgemoor Witch, and then you cast Galvanic Iteration. That's going to trigger your Witch to make a token. Then you cast a spell. You're going to get 2 copies. Each of those copies is also going to trigger Sedgemoor Witch to make 2 more tokens. Then maybe you flashback Galvanic Iteration, do it again. Things can get really out of control with these flashback copy spell, with a flashback copy spell like Galvanic Iteration and the Magecraft mechanic. It's also worth mentioning this could have some potential in older formats. The fact that the flashback is only 3 mana, it means that you can potentially just get it into your graveyard without ever casting it, dredge it over, discard it to Faithless Looting or Thrilling Discovery, or in Standard you can learn it into the graveyard with the loot mode of First Day of Class or any of the other Learn Lesson spells. So I think that's another huge upside. We've mostly focused on casting it and then casting it again, but just getting it in your graveyard somehow else and then flashing it back for 3 mana, that is a really big upside of this card, because 3 mana for the flashback is almost shockingly efficient. I would have expected it to be more mana than that. So that's the most exciting mode, that you don't even necessarily ever have to draw this card. You can just get it in your graveyard somehow and use it from there and still get its effect. As far as Commander is concerned, we see Teach by Example in the other lesser copy spells be kind of staples in a lot of Spellslinger decks. Rutha and Viren and Zaffi and Kalamax, they love playing these copy spells. Galvanic Iteration is just better than the other ones. This is one of the best copy spells that Wizards has ever printed because of that flashback mode. So this either joins the other copy spells in these decks, or if you gotta drop something, this is better than the other options. Like, this is one of the best copying spells that Wizards has ever printed. The only downside is copy spells traditionally haven't been staples of Constructed. They're more like janky against the odds cards. They do ridiculous things. I can't think of many like top tier decks that have been built around them, but maybe Galvanic Iteration, thanks to that very efficient flashback cost, might be able to break the mode. We also got Beloved Beggar / Generous Soul. And this card, it's not especially playable, but it shows off a new twist on transforming, a new mechanic. So I wanted to show it off just to explain the mechanic. So Beloved Beggar, 2 mana, 0/4, human peasant, and it has Disturb of 6, and Disturb means you can cast this card from your graveyard transform for its Disturb cost. The backside, the transform side, Generous Souls, a 6 mana because of the Disturb cost, 4/4 flying vigilance, and then if we go to the graveyard from anywhere, you gotta exile it. So you can't just keep casting it and having it die and recasting it. So essentially, this is a new twist on Undying, sort of, I guess. The downside is you gotta put a lot of mana into this. Like, Disturbed is 6 mana, so you play Beloved Beggar early game, wait for it to die, late game, cast it from your graveyard. Seems great and limited, a lot of flexibility there, and we'll have to see. There could certainly be cards they have a cheap Disturb cost. They could be very powerful. This is just a random uncommon, so we gotta wait and see what the rares and mythics with this mechanic look like. But it's an interesting mechanic. It seems very flexible in value generating for limited. Whether or not it makes it in Constructed, gonna depend on the higher rarity cost. But it's really interesting to see all the different ways Wizards has been able to interact with the transform mechanic. We got day and night. We got more traditional transforming. We got things that are transforming based on the number of werewolves you have on the battlefield, let's say. So there's a lot of different things that Wizards is doing with the transform mechanic, and I think that's really sweet. We also got Sigarda, Champion of Light, a return of Sigarda. We get one every Innistrad, it feels like. So new Sigarda, 4 mana, 4/4, Legendary Angel. It's a Selesnya card, of course. Flying and Trample gives your humans +1/+1, and then it has another new mechanic, Coven. Coven, when Sigarda attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different power, look at the top 5 cards of your library, you can reveal a human card from among them, put them in your hand, put the rest on the bottom in any order. So Coven is if you control 3 or more different creatures with different powers. So essentially, once you have a bunch of different power worth of creatures, kind of an interesting mechanic. As far as Sigarda itself, I think the card's pretty reasonable. It might not be quite as good as the original Sigarda. Like, original Sigarda, 5/5 flying hexproof and prevention of sacrifice effects for 5. You just couldn't kill Sigarda. It is one of the hardest creatures to remove in all of Magic. Sigarda Heron's Grace ended up being kind of meh, honestly. It was a little bit slow. It saw very fridge standard play. I think that Sigarda Champion of Light, not as busted as original Sigarda, but better than Sigarda Heron's Grace. I mean, it costs 1 mana less, and it generates card advantage better than Sigarda Heron's Grace. So I think that Sigarda has some potential in Standard. It tussles pretty well with a lot of the popular flyers in the format. Goldspan Dragon, Righteous Valkyrie, Galazeth. These are some of the key flying threats in Standard 2022. Probably going to be some of the best threats after rotation. Sigarda either just stops them, like Righteous Valkyrie or Galazeth, or worst case, it can trade with a Goldspan Dragon. And it only costs 4 mana, so technically getting a mana discount compared to Goldspan Dragon as well. So I think that stat-wise, 4/4 Flying Trample, pretty decent creature for standard. However, for Sigarda to really be good, we're gonna need humans to be good, because the Coven attack trigger cares about humans. It pumps humans. Are we gonna have enough humans to make human tribal a thing? To some extent, we gotta wait and see, because we're gonna get more humans in Innistrad itself, but I think we already can see enough good humans in standard, like Archpriest of Arona, Luminarch Aspirant, Elite Spellbinder. These are already cards people are playing. It seems pretty easy to just jam them all together and make a green-white human aggro deck, with Sigarda being the top end of your curve, pumping your stuff, generating value as it attacks. So I think Sigarda has a chance to be pretty decent in standard. Might not be as insane as the original, but still, this is a pretty solid card if we have the pieces to make human tribal work. We also got, speaking of mechanics, Secrets of the Key, 1-mana instant, investigate, flashback of 4. If it was cast from the graveyard, investigate twice instead. So clue tokens are returning, investigation is happening. This card itself, I mean, kind of a very, very inefficient cantrip, because you got to spend 2 to crack the clues that you get from investigating. So essentially, at first it's 3 mana draw a card, and then if you flash it back, you're spending 4 to flash it back. You're getting 2 clues. Those each cost 2 mana, so it's 8 mana to draw 2 cards. Sure, you can split it up. Sure, it's an instant, but it is definitely not a very efficient spell. Like, not an efficient spell at all. So I don't think this card is good, but I love the investigate mechanic. It is one of my favorite mechanics that Wizards has made in recent years, and I'm excited to see it coming back. Like, maybe you could play Secrets of Keys at like Lannis Commander or something. Even there, you gotta be really desperate. You gotta be really desperate to make a clue token before you get to Secrets of the Keys. But it's awesome that Investigate's coming back, because the mechanic is great. It's fun. It's good and limited. It's good and constructed. It is an all-star mechanic. Next up, we have another new Daybound, Nightbound Werewolf, Brutal Cathar / Moon Rage Brute. So the front half, Brutal Cathar, 3 mana, 2/2. Human Soldier Werewolf. When it enters a battlefield or transforms into Brutal Cathar, you get to exile target creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And then, of course, once it becomes night, you flip around into Moonrage Brute, which is a 3/3 first strike with Ward of Pay 3 life. So either a 3/3 first strike, Ward of 3 life for 3, or a 2/2 exile one of your opponent's things for 3. And you could potentially get additional value out of it if you can flip back and forth. Like, maybe you cast it when it's daytime and you exile something, then you flip it into Moon Rage Brute, but then it goes back to daytime again and you get to exile something else. So we've seen a lot of creatures in the same vein of Brutal Cathar. Fairgrounds Warden, Banisher Priest, Fiend Hunter, all do something very similar, where you're able to exile one of your opponent's things as long as it stays on the battlefield. I think that Brutal Cathar, it's an upgrade in general. I mean, the upgrade is it can transform into an even better creature, a 3/3 first strike Ward of Pay 3 life. That's a pretty reasonable 3-drop, so you get a better creature out of the deal. On the other hand, those type of cards, these 3-drop Fairgrounds Warded Fiend Hunters, they've pretty much all been invalidated by Skyclave Apparition, which is just by far the best of this style of card. Hitting any non-land, non-token permanent, mana value 4 or less, and not giving back the original card, giving back a much worse token when it dies. And Skyclave Apparition is still in standard, so that would be my concern for Brutal Cathar. It might just be worse Skyclave Apparition. The upside is, it's creature types, for one thing. It's bigger body if you transform, for another thing. And maybe the possibility of exiling multiple things. Although, I gotta say, I'm actually a little nervous. I'm imagining there can be some blowouts where you, like, play exile something, flip around a couple times, exile something else, and then your Brutal Cathar dies, and your opponent gets both 2 or 3 of their things back, maybe at instant speed during combat, and you just get completely blown out. So while removing stuff is good, keep in mind that stuff is gonna be coming back if your opponent can deal with a Brutal Cathar at some point in the future. If Brutal Cathar is good enough for standard, I think there's a couple of possibilities. One is, it's a human. We were just talking about Sigarda and the possibility of human tribal being a thing. If you're playing a Sigarda humans deck, and you have this Lord in Sigarda that's going to pump Brutal Cathar, and Sigarda can dig for Brutal Cathar, then maybe Brutal Cathar is better than Skyclave Apparition. Like, in a vacuum, Skyclave is better, but in the right scenario, in the right tribal deck, maybe maybe Brutal Cathar is actually the option to go with. Another possibility would be a day-bound, night-bound werewolf style deck. If you're playing Arlinn and you have shenanigans for flipping back and forth, or you really care about turning day into night quickly so you can play the backside of Arlinn and smash your opponent with a 5/5 indestructible hasty threat, then Brutal Cathar goes up in value as well. So in a generic deck in a vacuum, Brutal Cathar, worst Skyclave apparition, with some sweet flavor with it flipping around into a werewolf, but in the right deck, in the right scenario, it could even be an upgrade. So I like this card a lot. I think this card's pretty powerful, and it could have a home in Standard if the decks that care about its creature types or care about its mechanics are good. We also got our dual land cycle, and I gotta say, I'm pretty pleased with our new dual lands. I was really worried that we were gonna get more Snarls, because Snarls started out in Shadows over Innistrad, and oh boy, I hate the Snarl lands so much. They're one of my least favorite land cycle. Instead, we got the slow lands, Shipwreck Marsh, Overgrown Farm, Deserted Beach, Hunted Ridge, and Rockfell Vale. These are lands that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. So these are essentially reverse fast lands. Fast lands enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands. Shipwreck Marsh in Friends. The slow lands, they want you to have at least 2 lands on the battlefield. So what this means is, in the early game, they're not going to be very good. If you're playing an aggro deck and you want to have untapped mana on turn 1 so you can play your 1-drop and start attacking or whatever, these lands aren't going to be ideal for you. On the other hand, in slower decks, they're going to be absolutely insane, where after turn 2, they should be coming into play untapped through the entire rest of the game. So basically, really just flip fast lands on their head. Another comparison would be the lands from Battle for Zendikar, which are also similarly formatted. Take Prairie Stream. Prairie Stream, Island Plains, enters a battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Deserted Beach, very similar. You lose the land types. It's not an island in the plains, but it comes into play untapped if you control 2 or more of any land. I think that this new cycle is mostly better than the Zendikar lands. I think the fact that you can have any 2 lands is actually huge. Needing 2 basic lands really limits Prairie Stream and the other Battle for Zendikar lands to 2 color decks, and even there, they can be pretty clunky. I've played them in budget decks a lot of times, and even then, they're still coming into play tapped a lot. The new cycle, I think, is going to come into play untapped much, much more often. As far as Standard is concerned, they play really well with the pathways. Pathways don't have land types. They don't care about land types. So I think that that's going to be the foundation of our Standard mana bases. Decks with a bunch of these new lands from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, along with a bunch of pathways. What it doesn't play well with are the Snarls. The Snarls, they care about land types, pathways, and these new lands. Neither of them have the land types. So the Snarls are going to be kind of left on the sidelines. They're not very good. I think that these new lands are actually going to be a reason to play allied color decks over the enemy color decks, just so you have a better mana base. Also worth mentioning, when you talk about these lands in general, they're at their best in 2 places, I would say. One is slower decks. As we talked about before, they're never going to come into play untapped on turn 1, on turn 2. So if you're playing aggro, these lands are going to be a little clunky. Thankfully, that's where the pathways come in. The pathways can come into play untapped early, and then these can come in and fix your mana starting on turn 3. The other place these lands are really going to shine, I think, is in like 4 or 5 color decks, where you don't have any restriction about what land types you need on the battlefield, needing basic lands on the battlefield. All you gotta do is get a couple lands into play, and then these are gonna come into play untapped for the rest of the game. So I think if you're playing 3, 4, 5 colors, then these lands are actually pretty powerful. Of course, not a ton of potential once you get back to Modern, because then you have fetch lands. You really need the land types to be able to fetch things out, but I think that these lands are gonna be good in Standard, probably have some potential in slower decks in Pioneer, and we'll probably see some play in Historic as well, especially in those decks that are, 4 and 5 colors. So solid, if unspectacular, new land cycle coming in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So a couple of days ago, Mark Rosewater mentioned in his hints that we're getting a sweet Innistrad reprint, and I think we found out what it is on day number 1. Unruly Mob, all the way back from the original Innistrad All-Star of Sacrifice Innistrad draft deck, sort of. I don't even know if All-Star would apply. Filler for Innistrad limited Sacrifice draft decks, but it is a sweet reprint. Unruly Mob, It's fine. Hopefully this was not the card they were talking about when they were hyping up the reprints, because it's just a random comment. But if you draft some sort of human sacrifice deck in Innistrad Midnight Hunt, you're not going to mind having an unruly mob in your deck. Rounding things out today, we got some lower rarity cards. Some of the stuff's not bad, like Snarling Wolf, kind of a Basking Root Wallow 1-drop, reasonable maybe for Wolf Tribal. Some other Wolf stuff, some limited stuff to fill out your draft decks, but we just got so many cards and so much to talk about. We can't go over them each one by one, but you can find them all at mtgpreviews.com. A couple of more Transform cards, Tavern Ruffian, 4-mana 2/5 that turns into a 6/5, another Disturb card, Bait Hook Angler. Kind of interesting just because it's cheap. 2-mana, 2/1, but then you can disturb it from your graveyard, transform for 2 mana, and get a 1/2 flyer, but still probably mostly a limited style thing. And anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. What are you most hyped about? What are you thinking about this set? Did we finally get our Werewolf commander? How good is the new Arlinn? What do you think of the new mechanics? All the different ways to transform? Let me know in the comments. And oh yeah, another reminder, if you want to see everything, you can find all of today's previews and all the previews throughout spoiler season over at mtgpreviews.com. And we got some commander spoilers today as well from the new Innistrad Commander products, and I'm making a video on those to put over on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube, so check that out in a couple of hours once I get it done. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will be back tomorrow with more daily Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, and I will talk to you soon.